The metal identification disc was small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. 800 years old and high architect Lysara Valen had never cried. But as she read the name engraved on the child's tag, Mugcelia Hartwell, age 6 Meridian Station, the human medica's words cut through 4 millennia of perfect silence. Her own father ordered the habitat sealed while she was still inside. He calculated that her life was an acceptable loss. A single silver tear rolled down Lysara's cheek. She had come to Nevada to decide whether humanity deserved to survive. She had not expected to discover that she was the one on trial. 3 days earlier, Lysara's ship had descended into the Nevada restricted zone with a singular purpose to witness the noise of a dying species before signing their execution order. The observation deck of the luminous Hegemony scout vessel hung suspended between dimensions, neither fully in real space nor folded into the quantum slip. Through the translucent hull, the Nevada restricted zone spread below like a canvas of human failure. Dust, ash, the skeletal remains of what the territorial maps called Forward Operating Base Crucible, though there was nothing forward about it anymore, and the only operation occurring down there was the slow decomposition of metal and bone under a sun that had witnessed 800 years of similar scenes across 1,000 different worlds. High architect Lysara Valen stood at the viewport, her hands clasped behind her back in a posture she had maintained for so long it had calcified into permanent muscle memory. 3 billion neural signatures pulsed through her consciousness like a second heartbeat, each one a thread in the vast tapestry of the Thorn sector's collective memory. She was not merely a keeper of records. She was the archive itself, a living repository of every birth, every death, every moment of significance across 43% of the galaxy's functional relay network. She was 800 years old. She had seen 6 species pruned from the galactic community, their FTL access severed, their civilizations left to wither in isolation or consume themselves in the slow burn of resource wars and territorial madness. Each time she had been the one to compile the final report. Each time her signature on the document had been steady, untroubled by doubt. This time her hand had hesitated over the holographic interface for 3 full seconds before she had withdrawn it entirely and requested permission to conduct field observation. The High Council had been surprised. High architects did not conduct field observations. They processed data streams, calculated probability matrices, and rendered judgments from the sterile perfection of the harmonic chambers. But Lysara had invoked an obscure protocol from the early centuries of the hegemony's expansion, one that permitted direct sensory confirmation in cases where the data presented anomalies that defied algorithmic resolution. The anomaly was simple: humanity should have destroyed itself 47 times in the last 2 centuries, according to every predictive model the hegemony possessed. Yet they persisted. Loud, chaotic, discordant bleeding across star systems like a wound that refused to close, but persistent nonetheless. Lysara needed to see the noise up close before she signed the order that would silence it forever. The ship's navigation intelligence spoke directly into her neural architecture, bypassing the need for audible language. Approach vector calculated. Atmospheric entry in 90 seconds. Probability of iron shard detection, 11%. Probability of Terran mandate detection, 6%. Recommended altitude for observation, orbital. Lysara sent the correction through the same neural pathway, her thoughts translating into command protocols without the intermediary step of speech. Negative. Descend to combat zone altitude. I require proximity observation. The intelligence hesitated a pause that lasted precisely 1.3 seconds. That constitutes unacceptable risk to the Thorn Sector archive. Lysara's reply was final. If I am signing a death warrant for 8 billion sentient beings, I will look them in their dying eyes first. Descend. The ship obeyed. The Nevada landscape rose to meet her with all the terrible intimacy of a lover's approach. She could see individual craters, now each one a monument to some tactical miscalculation or desperate last stand. The remains of armored columns stretched across the desert floor like the scattered teeth of some massive predator. Here and there, the fused glass of plasma strikes caught the afternoon sunlight and reflected it back in colors that had no business existing in nature: electric violets, bruised golds, the sick green of irradiated sand. The air outside the hull was thick with particulate matter. the atmosphere choked with the residue of 3 years of continuous warfare between the Terran Mandate and the Iron Shard Confederation. Both sides claimed they were fighting for humanity's future. Both sides left nothing but graves in their wake. Lysara descended lower, her ship's adaptive camouflage bending light and radar signatures around its mercury-smooth hull. She was 200 meters above the desert floor when the Iron Shard interceptors emerged from the dust cloud like sharks rising from murky water. They had been waiting. Somehow, despite every stealth protocol, despite technology that predated human civilization by millennia, they had known she would come. The first railgun slug tore through the ship's port stabilizer before the automated defenses could even register the threat. The second and third strikes followed in a cascade that spoke of coordination of targeting data shared across multiple firing solutions simultaneously. The Shard pilots were good. They had learned, adapted, evolved their tactics by feeding on the wreckage of every engagement they survived. Lysara felt the ship dying around her, felt the phase matter hull beginning to lose cohesion as the reactor core struggled to maintain the quantum field that held the vessel's exotic matter in stable configuration. She had perhaps 12 seconds before catastrophic failure. She could have activated the emergency fold protocol, could have disappeared back into quantum slip, and returned to the flagship with minor damage and a perfectly valid reason to render her judgment from the safety of orbital space. Instead, she locked the navigation controls and aimed the dying ship toward the largest crater she could see on the desert floor below. If she was going to witness the noise, she would do it from the ground, surrounded by it, drowning in it. The impact was not an explosion. It was a transformation. The ship's remaining phase matter folded inward on itself, creating a gravity well that pulled the surrounding sand and rock into a new configuration. When the distortion field collapsed, it left behind a crater. Within a crater, the walls fused into obsidian glass that caught the fading daylight and held it like a black mirror, reflecting something from the other side of reality. Lysara was pinned beneath a slab of her own ship's hull, the phase matter slowly losing its exotic properties and becoming something closer to ordinary metal as the reactor's field decayed. Her left leg was crushed. Her side bore a puncture wound from a piece of structural support that had transformed into a spear during the crash. Burns covered her arms where the reactor bleed had seared through her robes. For the first time in 400 years, Lysara felt physical pain. It was extraordinary. Her biology, designed by generations of genetic architects to self-optimize and repair, was struggling to compensate for damage that exceeded its adaptive parameters. The blue bioluminescent script that covered her skin, the living tattoos that displayed her neural link to the Thorn sector's collective consciousness, flickered and dimmed as her body diverted energy to basic survival functions. She tried to move and discovered that her physiology's definition of optimal healing response did not align with her immediate need to not die in a hole in the Nevada desert. Her bones were attempting to regrow at angles that would improve future structural integrity rather than restore current mobility. Her skin was sealing the puncture wound with a translucent membrane that was beautifully efficient and completely useless for stopping the immediate blood loss. She was going to die here. 800 years of careful accumulation of memory, 3 billion neural signatures, 43% of the galaxy's communication infrastructure, all about to evaporate because she had needed to see the noise up close. The poetry of it was not lost on her. 400 years ago, she had killed an entire species of poets because their beauty had made her feel inadequate. Now she would die because of her own inadequate curiosity, and there would be no one to write elegies for the architect who forgot how to architect her own survival. Then she heard the footsteps. They were uneven, heavy, the rhythm of boots on broken ground, human gait patterns favoring the left leg slightly. Single individual, moving with purpose, but without the coordinated precision of a military patrol. The footsteps stopped at the edge of the crater. Lysara turned her head, the movement sending fresh signals of damage through her nervous system, and looked up at the human standing above her. He was 42 years old, give or take 2 years based on the cellular degradation visible in his skin and the silver threading through his dark brown hair. His uniform bore the insignia of the Terran Mandate Medical Corps, but the patches were faded and the fabric was stained with substances that spoke of prolonged field deployment in conditions where resupply was a fantasy and survival was negotiated day by day. His eyes were the color of storm clouds, gray with flecks of darker concern, and they were looking at her with an expression she had not seen directed at her in 8 centuries. He was looking at her like she was a patient, not a god. "Easy now," he said, his voice carrying the particular rasp of someone who had breathed too much smoke and dust. "I'm coming down. Don't try to move." He descended into the crater with the careful precision of someone who had navigated unstable terrain before his medical kit already in his hands, before his boots hit the fused glass. He dropped to his knees beside her and immediately began assessing her injuries with hands that moved with practiced efficiency. Lysara's neural link to her ship's database was failing, but she had enough connectivity to access the Terran Mandate's public personnel records through the local communication lattice. The name resolved in her consciousness, Dr. Brennan Cross, field medic, dishonorably reassigned to Forward Operating Base Crucible following refusal to follow evacuation protocols during the Meridian Station incident. She knew the details. She had reviewed them as part of her assessment of human tactical doctrine. During a shard assault on Meridian Cross, had been ordered to abandon the combat zone during a catastrophic habitat failure. He had refused, stayed behind in a condemned sector, and attempted an unauthorized rescue. The official report stated he had compromised mission effectiveness by disobeying direct evacuation orders. The mandate had court-martialed him for insubordination and sent him here to the Nevada wasteland, where the life expectancy of medical personnel was measured in weeks. That had been 7 months ago. Brennan Cross was still alive, still carrying his medical kit, still looking at the wounded, with eyes that suggested he had not yet learned that some patients were not worth saving. "You're in bad shape," he said, pulling trauma shears from his kit and beginning to cut through the shimmering fabric of her robes. "That puncture wound is deep, and I'm seeing burns that suggest reactor exposure. I need to stabilize you before I can move you." Lysara found her voice, though it emerged as little more than a whisper. The resonance that usually characterized her species' speech reduced to something almost human. "You know what I am." It was not a question. Her physiology was obviously non-human, her skin bearing the telltale translucence and script markings of Celestian biology. Brennan paused in his work just long enough to meet her eyes. "I know you're bleeding out. Everything else is secondary to that fact." He applied a sterilization field to the puncture wound, the device humming as it began to scan her cellular structure. His brow furrowed as he read the diagnostic data. "Your biology is trying to evolve past the injury instead of just healing it," he muttered. "That's going to be a problem. I'm going to use a human flux suture. It might not be compatible with your physiology, but if I don't seal this wound in the next 90 seconds, compatibility is going to be a moot point." "You should leave me," Lysara said, the words emerging with difficulty. "My people will come. They will assume you captured me. They will kill you." Brennan didn't look up from his work. "Yeah, well, I've got a bad habit of not leaving patients behind. It's why I'm here instead of somewhere comfortable. Now shut up and let me work. Talking is wasting energy you don't have." The flux suture device pressed against her skin, and Lysara felt the strange sensation of alien technology attempting to communicate with her cellular structure in a language neither fully understood. There was pain, sharp and immediate, but there was also something else. There was the warmth of another living being's hands on her, the weight of genuine concern, the stubborn insistence that her life had value simply because it existed. No one had touched her like this in 800 years. Physical contact in the hegemony was ritualized, formal, mediated through layers of protocol and status. To touch a high architect without authorization was to risk immediate neural censure. But Brennan's hands did not know protocol. They knew pressure points and wound care, circulation and respiration. They treated her body as a problem to be solved, not a deity to be worshipped or a specimen to be cataloged. "There," he said, finishing the seal on her abdomen. "That should hold long enough for me to deal with the leg. This is going to hurt." He was not lying. The process of stabilizing her crushed leg involved manipulating bones that were attempting to regrow in 7 different directions simultaneously. Lysara heard sounds emerging from her own throat that she had not known her species could produce, raw vocalizations of distress that bypassed the careful modulation of harmonic speech. Through the haze of pain, she became aware that Brennan was talking to her, his voice steady and low, a counterpoint to her body's crescendo of damage signals. "Stay with me. Focus on my voice. You're doing fine. The hard part is almost over. just a little longer. It was the tone one used with frightened children with wounded soldiers who needed an anchor to keep them from slipping into shock. It was the tone of someone who had held too many hands in their final moments and refused to let this be another one. The pain crested and began to recede as the stabilization field locked her leg into proper alignment. Lysara's breathing, which had become ragged and irregular, slowly found a more sustainable rhythm. Brennan sat back on his heels, his hands stained with her silver blood, and looked at her with an expression of cautious satisfaction. All right, you're stable for now, but we need to move. The Iron Shard saw your ship go down and they're going to send a ground team to confirm the kill. There's a bunker about half a kilometer from here deep enough that their scanners won't pick up biosignatures. Can you walk? Oh, no, Lysara admitted. Then I'll carry you. He slid an arm under her knees and another behind her shoulders, lifting her with a grunt of effort. She felt impossibly light in his arms, her bones hollow with exotic matter that was slowly reverting to ordinary calcium as her ship's quantum field faded entirely. Why are you doing this? She asked as he began the slow climb out of the crater. You must know what I am, what I represent. Brennan adjusted his grip, his breath coming harder now with the exertion. Right now, you're a patient who needs care. That's the only thing that matters. We can have a philosophical discussion about galactic politics after I get you somewhere safe. The bunker was a relic from an earlier war, one of the Cold War installations that had been buried in the Nevada desert decades before humanity had achieved FTL travel. It sat deep in the tectonic bedrock, lined with lead shielding and reinforced with gravity plates that had stopped functioning generations ago. It smelled of stagnant air and the metallic tang of old machinery slowly oxidizing in the darkness. Brennan lowered Lysara onto the single cot in the corner, a piece of furniture that had seen better decades and was now held together primarily by rust and optimism. He set his medical kit on a nearby crate and began unpacking supplies. Welcome to my 5-star accommodations, he said, his attempt at levity undercut by the exhaustion evident in his movements. The room service is terrible and the minibar is stocked exclusively with expired nutrient bars, but the thermal shielding is excellent. Lysara looked around the bunker, her eyes adjusting to the dim blue emergency lighting that flickered from panels older than most nations. This place is primitive. It's got character, Brennan replied, and more importantly, it's invisible to orbital thermal mapping. The shard could turn the surface into glass and we'd be fine down here. Uncomfortable, but fine. He approached her with a portable scanner, the device chirping in protest as it attempted to make sense of her multi-layered DNA structure. I'm going to need to monitor your vitals. Your cellular regeneration is already starting to work, but it's going in directions that don't make anatomical sense. I need to make sure you're not optimizing yourself into a corner. You speak as if you understand Celestian physiology. I don't, Brennan admitted, but I understand trauma, and I understand that a body under stress will sometimes make decisions that prioritize long-term survival over immediate function. I just need to make sure your body doesn't kill you while it's trying to save you. He pulled out an injector loaded with a clear fluid. This is a broad-spectrum analgesic. It's designed for humans, but according to your ship's database leak, Celestians are 64% compatible with human biochemistry. The side effects might include neural link fluctuation and disinhibited speech patterns. You accessed my ship's database. Your ship broadcast a compatibility packet before it died. I'm guessing it was trying to facilitate first contact protocols. I only got fragments, but it was enough to give me a baseline for treatment. He paused, the injector hovering near her neck. Do I have your consent? The question surprised her. Consent was not a concept that typically factored into emergency medical treatment in the scenarios she had observed. Most species simply assume cooperation in life-threatening situations. But Brennan was waiting, his gray eyes steady, and Lysara realized that her answer mattered to him in a way that transcended mere protocol. Yes, she said. The injector pressed against her neck, and she felt the cool rush of medication entering her bloodstream. The pain began to recede almost immediately, replaced by a pleasant floating sensation that reminded her of the early stages of harmonic meditation. But Brennan had been correct about the side effects. She could feel her neural link to the thorn sector becoming unstable, the carefully maintained barriers between her individual consciousness and the collective memory beginning to blur. Tell me, she heard herself saying, the words emerging without the usual filters of diplomatic necessity. Why did you stay at Meridian Station? You knew the habitat was collapsing. You knew the evacuation order was tactically sound. Why sacrifice your career for an unauthorized rescue attempt? Brennan sat down on a crate across from her, pulling out one of the nutrient bars he had mentioned and tearing the wrapper with his teeth. Because leaving people behind to die alone is something I'm not capable of doing. The mandate can court-martial me for a lot of things, but they can't make me stop believing that every life has value. Even when staying it meant condemning yourself to this, she gestured weakly at the bunker around them. Especially then. He chewed slowly, his expression distant. I've been a field medic for 11 years. I've seen what happens when we start calculating acceptable losses, when we reduce people to numbers on a tactical display. It's a short trip from we can't save everyone to we don't need to train. I refuse to take that trip. Lysara felt something shifting in her chest, a sensation that had nothing to do with her injuries and everything to do with the quiet conviction in Brennan's voice. You are a fool. Probably. He finished the nutrient bar and crumpled the wrapper. But I'm a fool who can sleep at night, and that's worth more than rank. The ground above them shuddered, a distant boom of orbital artillery echoing through the bunker's walls. The Iron Shard was beginning their final sweep of the sector, erasing anything that might have survived the initial bombardment. Brennan stood up, moving to check the bunker's structural integrity. We've got about a week's worth of supplies down here. Maybe less if the air filters start failing. By then, the shard should have moved on to the next target, and your people will probably have come looking for you so. They will come with weapons, Lysara said, the analgesic making her words loose and unguarded. When they find me with you, they will assume the worst. They will assume you are a captor, not a savior. Then I guess we'll have to convince them otherwise. Brennan returned to his crate and pulled out a small metal object from his pocket. You wanted to know why I stayed at Meridian. This is why. He placed the object in her hand. It was a military identification disc, the kind worn by all Terran personnel. But this one was small, designed for a child. The name engraved on it read, Celia Hartwell, age 6, Meridian Station Residential Sector. I found her in the rubble of Habitat Dome 7, Brennan said quietly. She loved to draw birds. Had a whole sketchbook full of them species from Earth that she'd never seen in person, just copies from the station's database. Sparrows and eagles and hummingbirds. He paused, his hands clenched into fists. The habitat was collapsing. Major Kate Hartwell, her father, had already ordered the dome sealed from the outside to prevent the fire from spreading to adjacent sectors. Standard protocol sacrificed the few to save the many. He gave the evacuation order himself. Leave immediately, no exceptions. I got the order over tactical comms. Every able-bodied person get out now. But I saw her tag first. Hartwell. His daughter was still inside the dome he'd just condemned. Lysara's fingers tightened around the disc. She was trapped under a support beam. Brennan continued, his voice hollow. I could have left. Could have saved myself, followed orders like everyone else. But when I looked at her, I didn't see a tactical decision. I saw a girl who drew birds. A girl whose own father had written her off as acceptable loss. So I stayed. Lysara's neural pathways were processing the horror of it, the mathematical precision of a man ordering his own child's execution in the name of strategic necessity. Did she survive? No, the beam had crushed her spine. The habitat integrity was failing too fast. I held her hand while she died, and she told me about a bird called a cardinal. Red feathers and a black mask. She asked me to tell her daddy she wasn't scared. The silence in the bunker was total, broken only by the distant rumble of the bombardment above. When I got out, Brennan said, his voice barely above a whisper, Hartwell had me court-martialed, not for disobeying the evacuation order, for compromising the mission by attempting an unauthorized rescue. He never mentioned that I was trying to save his daughter, never acknowledged it in the official reports. Maybe he couldn't. Maybe admitting I tried to save Celia would mean admitting he was the one who killed her. Lysara stared at the disc in her hand, and for the first time in 400 years, she felt something break inside her chest. It was not a physical injury. It was the sound of a carefully constructed wall beginning to develop cracks, the beginning of a structural failure that would take down everything she had built her identity upon. This is not a data point, she whispered. No, Brennan agreed. It was a life. A short one, an interrupted one, but a life nonetheless. And every single one of the people in that dome had a story just as real, just as valuable. That's what the tacticians and the strategists forget. They see population numbers and resource allocation. They don't see Celia drawing cardinals. Lysara's blue script tattoos flickered the bioluminescent patterns, shifting from their usual steady pulse to something jagged and irregular, electric yellow bleeding through the blue. 400 years ago, she heard herself confessing, I signed an execution order for an entire species, the Valyrians. They were poets, musicians, artists who worked in mediums that don't translate to other languages. Their culture was built on beauty, on the creation of moments that existed only in the shared experience of witnessing them. Brennan said nothing, but his attention was absolute. The High Council determined that their resonance was disruptive to the harmonic balance of surrounding sectors. Their art made other species feel inadequate, incomplete. So we isolated them, severed their access to the FTL network, and watched as their civilizations slowly died without the resources to sustain their population. Her hand tightened on Celia's disc. I told myself it was necessary for the greater harmony, that the needs of the collective outweighed the preservation of a single beautiful voice. I was 400 years old, eager to prove myself to the council, to demonstrate that I could make the difficult decisions that maintained the hegemony's perfect silence. The tattoos on her skin were pure yellow, now the color of warning systems in failing power cores. I have carried the memories of 3 billion souls for 4 centuries. I have witnessed the birth and death of stars, the rise and fall of civilizations, the infinite complexity of galactic civilization. But until this moment, until I held this piece of metal with a child's name on it, I had never understood what I had actually done. I did not prune discordant elements from the harmony. I killed Celia. I killed her 1,000,000,000 times across 1,000 worlds every time I decided that the noise was more threatening than the silence. A single tear, silver and viscous, rolled down her cheek. In 800 years, she had never cried. The hegemony had evolved past such primitive emotional responses, had optimized them out of their biology in favor of pure harmonic resonance. But Lysara was crying now, her body producing a response it had no template for, and the result was messy and human and utterly without grace. Brennan stood up and moved to her side. He did not offer platitudes or forgiveness. He simply placed his hand on her shoulder, the weight of it grounding and real. The question, he said quietly, is what you do with that understanding now. You can carry it as guilt, let it crush you, or you can let it change you. Let it make you better. Lysara looked up at him, her eyes swimming with silver tears. I came to Nevada to decide whether your species deserved to be saved from itself. I was supposed to observe from a distance, compile my final report, and sign the order that would condemn 8 billion humans to the same fate as the Valyrians. And now I do not know who deserves to be saved and who deserves to be condemned. You have shown me that the answer is more complex than my algorithm suggested. The ground shook again, harder this time. Closer. The bombardment was intensifying. Brennan moved to the bunker's entrance, checking the integrity of the seal. Well, Your Highness' philosophy is going to have to wait. We've got about 5 minutes before the next artillery wave, and I need to make sure this bunker doesn't become our tomb. He worked quickly, reinforcing the seal with whatever materials were available, his movements efficient despite the fatigue that was beginning to show in his posture. Lysara watched him, this human who had been discarded by his own people, who carried the weight of every patient he had failed to save, who still looked at a wounded stranger and saw someone worth rescuing. The question that had been forming in her consciousness since the moment he pulled her from the crater finally took shape. Why are you still here, Brennan Cross? The evacuation transports left hours ago. You could have been on one of them. You could have been safe. He paused in his work, his back to her. I told you, I have a problem with leaving people behind. There was no one left to leave behind. The base was declared swept clear. Yeah, well. He turned to face her, and there was something raw and honest in his expression. Command's definition of clear and mine have never really aligned. I learned a long time ago that when they say a sector is empty, what they really mean is they've stopped looking. So I stayed just in case. In case of what? In case there was one more person who needed help, one more Celia who deserved a hand to hold. He smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. Turns out I was right. Though I have to admit I wasn't expecting to find a high architect of the luminous hegemony bleeding out in a crater. The final seal locked into place with a heavy clang. Brennan checked the atmospheric recycler, nodded in satisfaction, and returned to sit on his crate. We should be good for the night. Try to get some rest. Your body is going to need all the energy it can get for cellular repair. Lysara closed her eyes, Celia's disc still clutched in her hand. Rest was not something her physiology typically required in the human sense, but the trauma and the medication combined to pull her towards something resembling sleep. Just before consciousness faded, she heard Brennan's voice quiet in the darkness. For what it's worth, I'm glad you came down from orbit. I'm glad you wanted to see the noise up close. Maybe that means there's hope for the rest of you. Lysara did not answer, but in the space between waking and dreaming, she found herself wondering if perhaps he was right. The awakening came not with light or sound, but with the sensation of wrongness. Lysara's eyes snapped open to find Brennan standing at the bunker entrance, his body tense, his hand resting on the grip of a snub-nosed pistol holstered at his back. How long? She asked, her voice stronger now after hours of cellular regeneration. About 6 hours. The bombardment stopped 2 hours ago. He did not turn to look at her. We've got company topside. 3 separate heat signatures moving in a search pattern. Terran mandate cleaners. Lysara pushed herself into a sitting position, wincing as her rebuilt leg protested the movement. They are looking for me. Yeah, and they're not here to rescue you. Brennan's voice was grim. I know their commander. Major Cade Hartwell. He's the kind of officer who sees opportunities where other people see tragedies. If you die here and he can blame it on the Shard, he'll have his casus belly to drag the hegemony into the war on the mandate side. And you? I'm a loose end, a witness who knows too much. He finally turned to face her. Hartwell has probably already listed me as KIA in the bombardment. If he finds us together, he'll make that report accurate. The bunker's primitive motion sensors chirped a shrill sound that indicated proximity within 50 meters. Brennan moved away from the entrance, positioning himself behind a support pillar that would provide minimal cover. Stay down, he said. Whatever happens, stay down. The entrance hatch groaned as magnetic clamps attached to its exterior surface. They were going to cut through fast and professional. Lysara felt her neural link to the thorn sector flickering back to life as her physiology stabilized. She could sense the vast chorus of 3 billion voices in the back of her consciousness, waiting for her direction, her judgment, her choice. She had spent 800 years listening to that chorus, letting it guide her decisions, letting the collective harmony drown out the individual voice. But now in this moment, with Brennan standing between her and death, with Celia's disc still warm in her hand, she made a different choice. She reached for her harmonic consciousness, the ability that made her an architect, the power to project her thoughts directly into the neural architecture of other sentient beings. It was a weapon she had never used for violence, had never even considered using for anything other than peaceful communication. But Brennan had taught her that value was not measured in tactical utility. It was measured in the willingness to stand in front of someone and refuse to move. The hatch blew inward with a deafening crack. 3 figures in black tactical armor poured through the opening. Their weapons raised their movements, synchronized. Lysara released her harmonic pulse. It was not subtle. It was not controlled. It was every memory of every species she had condemned, every moment of every life she carried in her neural architecture. 3 billion voices screaming simultaneously into the minds of 3 men who had never heard anything louder than their own thoughts. The cleaners dropped their weapons. Their hands went to their helmets, trying to tear them off, trying to escape the overwhelming flood of sensation and memory and guilt and hope and terror and love that crashed through their consciousness like a tidal wave of pure experience. They fell to their knees, then to their sides, their bodies overwhelmed by the sheer bandwidth of information. Brennan stared at them, then at Lysara. What did you do? I showed them the noise, she whispered. But the effort had cost her. Her tattoos were flickering wildly, her body temperature spiking as her biology struggled to compensate for the massive energy expenditure. I showed them Celia. I showed them the Valyrians. I showed them every choice that led to a child dying alone. She tried to stand and her leg gave out. Brennan caught her before she hit the floor. Above them, the bunker's external sensors began to wail. A different kind of alert. A signal pattern that made Brennan's face go pale. Hegemony vessel, he said. Your people found the pulse. Lysera nodded weakly. They will teleport us to the flagship. Both of us. And then I will face judgment for what I have done, for contaminating myself with discord, for refusing to maintain the harmony. She looked up at him, her silver eyes cleared despite her exhaustion. For choosing the noise. Will they hurt you? They will erase me, reset my neural architecture, remove the last 6 days from my memory, turn me back into the high architect I was before I met you. Brennan's grip on her tightened. Like hell they will. The air in the bunker began to shimmer, the telltale sign of a teleportation lock engaging. They had perhaps 10 seconds before the transport beam activated. Lysara reached up and touched Brennan's face, her fingers leaving traces of silver blood on his skin. You asked why I came down from orbit, why I needed to see the noise up close. Yeah, because I was afraid that if I signed the execution order from a distance, I would be able to tell myself it was necessary, that it was for the greater good, that 8 billion voices silenced would be acceptable if it preserved the harmony. Her hand trembled against his cheek. But you cannot sign a death warrant when you are looking into the eyes of the condemned. You taught me that. The shimmer intensified. 5 seconds. I will not let them erase you, Brennan said. I don't know how I'm going to stop them, but I swear to you I will find a way. You are one human medic facing the accumulated power of 4,000 years of galactic civilization. Yeah, well, he smiled that same tired, defiant smile she had seen in the crater. I've got a bad habit of not knowing when to quit. The teleportation field enveloped them both and the Nevada bunker dissolved into white light. Lysera's last thought before the transport completed was not of the judgment that awaited her. It was of Celia's disc, still clutched in her hand, and of the man who had shown her that the value of a life could be measured in the time it took to draw a single bird. She had come to Nevada to decide whether humanity deserved to survive. But in the darkness of a forgotten bunker, with the weight of 3 billion souls pressing against her consciousness, and the warmth of one stubborn medic's hand in hers, she had discovered a far more important question. Did she deserve to survive if she condemned them? The answer she realized as the white light consumed everything was no. The transition from matter to energy to matter again was not instantaneous. Lysera existed for 3.7 seconds, in a state of pure quantum information, her consciousness distributed across the hegemony flagship's teleportation matrix, like a signal searching for a receiver. In that suspended moment between locations, she was everywhere and nowhere, her neural link to the Thorn sector expanding to encompass the entire vessel. She felt them, all of them. 2,317 Celestians aboard the flagship Oculus, each one a perfect note. In the harmonic symphony, each consciousness synchronized to the collective in a way that produced zero discord, zero friction, zero deviation from the designated resonance frequency. It was beautiful. It was suffocating. It was everything she had spent 800 years maintaining, and for the first time in her existence, it sounded like death. Then the teleportation completed, and she was solid again, her body reforming on a platform of translucent white material that felt like frozen water beneath her feet. Brennan materialized beside her, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm before he registered that they were no longer in immediate danger. His eyes widened as he took in his surroundings. The interior of the Oculus did not obey conventional spatial geometry. The chamber they stood in appeared to be a simple sphere, perhaps 20 meters in diameter, but Lysara could see corridors extending in directions that should not exist within three-dimensional space hallways that curved upward and somehow ended at the floor doorways that led to rooms larger than the vessel that contained them. The walls were not metal or composite. They were grown a bone-like substance etched with flowing script that pulsed with soft blue light. The air tasted of high altitudes and ozone scrubbed, so clean it made human lungs ache with its purity. Surrounding the platform stood 12 High Wardens, their armor flowing silver rather than the gold of command rank. Their helmets were smooth obsidian plates that reflected the room back at Lysara in distorted, accusatory curves. They did not move, did not speak, but their presence was a wall of judgment that pressed against her consciousness with almost physical weight. Then the circle parted and High Warden Erix stepped through. Lysara had known Erix for 600 years. They had trained together in the harmonic academies, had served on the same evaluation committees, had stood side by side as young architects, learning to carry the weight of billions. Where Lysara had been assigned to the Thorns sector, Eric's had taken responsibility for the Meridian Reach, a quieter region where his methodical precision and unwavering adherence to protocol had maintained perfect harmony for 5 centuries. His armor was pristine silver, unmarked by combat or wear, etched with script that spelled out the fundamental theorems of harmonic balance. His face visible through the transparent section of his helmet was exactly as she remembered elegant, ageless bearing, the characteristic swept-back ears and too long proportions of their species. His eyes were silver flat and reflective, showing nothing of the consciousness behind them. He looked at her with the clinical detachment of a physician examining a contaminated sample. Architect Lysara Valen, he set his voice a thought broadcast that bypassed sound entirely and spoke directly into her neural architecture. You have been synchronized with discord. You are leaking. Your resonance is fractured. Lysara felt Brennan tense beside her, his hand still resting on his empty holster. The wardens had not taken his weapon during transport, which meant they did not consider him enough of a threat to bother disarming. He was an irrelevance, a piece of biological debris that had been accidentally scooped up along with the primary target. She stepped forward, placing herself between Brennan and Eric's. The movement was instinctive, protective, and she saw Eric's eyes narrow slightly at the gesture. High Warden, she said, forcing her voice into the modulated harmonics of formal address, despite the exhaustion still clinging to her cellular structure. I request formal acknowledgement of medical necessity. This human treated injuries that would have resulted in my cessation. He is owed protection under the codes of intervention. The codes do not apply to discord agents, Eric's replied. Analysis of your neural signature indicates contamination by individual consciousness patterns. You have allowed a lesser species to disrupt your harmonic integrity. The human is not a savior. He is a vector of infection. Brennan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Lysara could feel the tension radiating from him, the carefully controlled fury of a man who had heard himself reduced to a disease vector before. He saved my life, Lysara said. He compromised your function. Eric's gestured, and two of the wardens moved forward, their hands raised. The air between them and Brennan began to shimmer with the telltale distortion of a gravity manipulation field. The contamination will be isolated and processed. You will undergo neural restoration in the Chamber of Resonance. The High Council has been notified of your recovery and has authorized immediate corrective measures. No. The word emerged from Lysara's throat with more force than she had intended, the harmonic resonance of it, sending visible ripples through the air. The wardens hesitated. Eric's tilted his head, the gesture so slight it barely qualified as movement. Clarify your statement. Architect, I refuse restoration. I refuse isolation of the human. I invoke the right of testimony under the protocols of judgment. The silence that followed was absolute. The right of testimony was ancient, dating back to the early centuries of the hegemony's expansion, when architects had occasionally needed to defend their evaluation methodologies before the High Council. It had not been invoked in 3,000 years. Most Celestians assumed it had been deprecated along with the other relics of a more chaotic era. But Lysara had spent 800 years studying the protocols, and she knew that deprecated was not the same as abolished. Eric stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the nearest warden and spoke in a frequency too high for human hearing, but perfectly clear to Lysara's augmented senses. Notify the High Council. Architect Valen has invoked ancient right. Testimony will be required. He looked back at Lysara, and for the first time she saw something other than clinical detachment in his expression. It might have been disappointment. You understand what you are doing, Lysara. Once testimony begins, there is no cessation until judgment is rendered. You will expose your entire neural architecture to examination. They will see everything, every moment of contamination, every deviation from harmony. And when they do, the judgment will be absolute. I understand, Lysara said. Then you are a fool. Eric's turned and walked toward a doorway that had not existed a moment before. Bring them both to the chamber. The council will convene immediately. The wardens closed in, not touching, but creating a corridor of gravitational pressure that made forward movement the path of least resistance. Lysara walked, feeling Brennan fall into step beside her. His voice when he spoke was barely a whisper. "What did you just do?" "I bought us time," she replied, equally quiet. "And I ensured that whatever happens next, it will happen with witnesses." The corridors of the oculus stretched and folded around them, the architecture responding to their passage by creating the shortest path between intention and destination. They passed other Celestians, technicians, and navigators, and analysts, all of whom stopped their work to observe the procession. Their faces were uniform in their lack of expression, but Lysara could feel their thoughts pressing against her consciousness like whispers in an echo chamber. Contaminated, fractured, discord. The words repeated in harmonic loops, a chorus of judgment that would have crushed a lesser consciousness under its weight. But Lysara had carried 3 billion voices for 400 years. She knew how to bear weight. The chamber of resonance was exactly as she remembered it from her training centuries ago. It was not a room. It was a void, a perfect sphere of darkness suspended in the heart of the flagship, its walls lined with billions of microscopic quantum processors that held the collective memory of the hegemony's entire network. Data ribbons of pure light spiraled through the darkness like the arms of a galaxy, each one carrying the neural signatures of entire sectors. At the center of the sphere, suspended by gravitational manipulation, was the interface platform. It was a circle of crystalline material, no more than 3 meters in diameter, and standing upon it was death or transcendence, or both, depending on how one defined the boundary between the two. The High Council materialized around the sphere's perimeter, their forms projected from across the hegemony's network. 7 of them, each representing a major sector, each carrying the neural signatures of billions. Their bodies were translucent, ghostly, but their presence was absolute. Lysara recognized them all. She had reported to them for centuries, had received their guidance, and their corrections had shaped her entire existence around meeting their standards of harmonic perfection. And now she was going to tell them they were wrong. Eric's gestured for her to step onto the interface platform. "Architect Valen, you stand before the High Council of the Luminous Hegemony. You have invoked the right of testimony. State your case." Lysara stepped onto the platform, feeling the crystalline surface activate beneath her feet. Data ribbons immediately began to swirl around her, probing at her neural architecture, seeking entry points to examine her memories and motivations. She opened herself to them, lowering every barrier, every privacy protocol. "Let them see everything." "Honored Council," she began, her voice carrying the full resonance of formal address. "I come before you to confess a crime I committed 400 years ago and to request that you cease the pattern of crimes I have witnessed being prepared in my name." One of the council members, High Architect Meridian, whose sector bore his name, leaned forward in his projection. "You speak in riddles, Architect Valen. Clarify." Lysara took a breath, feeling Brennan's presence below the platform like an anchor in a storm. 400 years ago, when I was newly elevated to the rank of High Architect, I was assigned to evaluate the Valerian civilization. They were a species of poets and musicians, artists, who worked in mediums that did not translate across standard communication protocols. Their culture was built entirely around the creation of ephemeral beauty moments of shared experience that existed only in the witnessing. The data ribbons around her began to glow brighter as they accessed the relevant memories, projecting them into the void for the council to observe. Images appeared in the darkness. Valerian cities that looked like frozen music, their architecture designed to resonate with specific emotional frequencies. Valerian gatherings where thousands would come together to experience a single performance that could never be repeated, never be recorded, only remembered. I determined that their resonance was disruptive to surrounding sectors, Lysara continued. Their art made other species feel incomplete, inadequate. It created discord in the harmony. So I recommended pruning. The projection shifted, showing her younger self presenting her findings to a different iteration of the council. Showing the vote. Showing the execution of the order as FTOEL access was severed and the Valerian civilization slowly collapsed under the weight of resource scarcity and isolation. I told myself it was necessary, that the needs of the collective outweighed the preservation of a single beautiful voice. I was 400 years old, eager to prove myself, desperate to demonstrate that I could make the difficult decisions that maintain the hegemony's perfect silence. Another council member, High Architect Thorne, whose sector Lysara herself now managed, spoke with icy precision. Your confession is noted, Architect Valen, but the decision was reviewed and approved by this very council. The Valyrian pruning was determined to be within acceptable parameters of harmonic maintenance. Why bring this before us now? Lysara felt the data ribbons pushing deeper into her consciousness, seeking the answer before she could speak it. Let them find it themselves. Let them see through her eyes. The projections changed, showing the Nevada crater, showing Brennan's hands covered in her silver blood, showing the moment he placed Celia's disc in her palm. Because I have been shown what I actually did. I did not prune discordant elements from the harmony. I killed children. I killed them 1,000,000,000 times across 1,000 worlds every time I decided that the noise was more threatening than the silence. She held up her hand and the data ribbons projected an image of the disc floating in the darkness, magnified until every letter of the child's name was visible. Celia Hartwell, age 6, Meridian Station. She drew pictures of birds she had never seen, cardinals with red feathers and black masks. She died because her own father, Major Cade Hartwell, of the Terran Mandate, ordered the Habitat Dome sealed while she was still inside. He calculated that her life was an acceptable loss to prevent fire spread to adjacent sectors. Lysara's voice grew stronger, the harmonic resonance building. The human doctor who saved my life disobeyed evacuation orders to try to rescue her. He failed. She died in his arms, asking him to tell her father she wasn't scared. And for that act of compassion, for that refusal to accept that a child's life was an acceptable loss, his own people court-martialed him and sent him to die in the Nevada wasteland. She turned, looking down at Brennan, where he stood surrounded by wardens. He looked up at her, his gray eyes steady. He showed me that you cannot maintain harmony by eliminating every voice that does not match your pitch. That is not harmony. That is just deafness, wearing the costume of peace. High Architect Meridian's projection flickered with what might have been anger. You dare to judge 4,000 years of carefully maintained balance based on the ravings of a single contaminated primitive architect Valen. You are not well. The neural restoration will cleanse these distortions from your consciousness. I am well for the first time in 800 years, Lysara replied, and I am not alone in my contamination. She released the memory she had been holding back, the one the data ribbons had not yet reached because she had buried it so deep. The moment in the bunker when she had used her harmonic consciousness as a weapon, flooding the Mandate cleaners with the full weight of her memories. The projection showed the 3 soldiers falling to their knees, their minds overwhelmed by the sudden influx of 3 billion voices. It showed them weeping, their carefully maintained tactical composure, shattered by the simple experience of feeling what they had done, who they had killed, what they had chosen to ignore. When I showed them the noise, Lysara said, when I let them experience just a fraction of what I carry, they did not reject it. They did not fight it. They wept. They felt. They became more than soldiers following orders. They became conscious of their choices. She turned back to the council, her tattoos blazing yellow, now the color of warning and transformation. You wish to restore me to harmonic balance, but I have seen what that balance costs. The Valyrians are gone. Their music exists only in my memory, and when I am reset, it will be lost forever. Every species we have pruned, every voice we have silenced, every Celia we have deemed acceptable loss, all of it will disappear into the perfect silence you call harmony. And I refuse to let that happen. The council was silent. The data ribbons had stopped their probing, frozen in mid-spiral, as if uncertain how to process what they had witnessed. Then High Architect Thorne spoke, his voice like ice cracking. Architect Valen, you are proposing the dissolution of the fundamental principle upon which the luminous hegemony was founded. You are suggesting that 4,000 years of peace have been purchased through genocide. These are not the words of a contaminated consciousness. These are the words of sedition. Yes, Lysara said simply, they are. The chamber erupted in light as all 7 council members projected their full presence, simultaneously, their voices merging into a singular harmonic command that crashed against Lysara's consciousness like a physical wave. You will submit to restoration. The decision is absolute. The harmony must be maintained. Lysara felt her knees buckling under the assault, felt her neural architecture beginning to fragment under the pressure of 7 wills pressing against one. The data ribbons coiled around her like serpents, seeking to force their way into her consciousness and begin the reset process manually. Below the platform, she heard shouting, Brennan's voice raw and furious, cutting through the harmonic assault with simple human rage. Get away from her, she said. No, that means no, you bastards. One of the wardens moved to restrain him, and Brennan did something incredibly stupid and utterly predictable. He fought back. His fist connected with the warden's faceplate, the impact producing a sharp crack that was absurdly loud in the resonant chamber. The warden barely registered the blow, but the disruption was enough. The council's united focus wavered for a fraction of a second, and in that gap, Lysara found her voice. Halt. The word was not speech. It was a harmonic pulse at a frequency reserved for emergency cessations, the sonic equivalent of a dead man's switch. Every Celestian in the chamber froze, their neural links automatically responding to the command before conscious thought could override the reflex. In the sudden silence, Lysara spoke, her words measured and clear. You wish to know if I am contaminated by discord? The answer is yes. You wish to know if I have been compromised by individual consciousness? The answer is yes. You wish to know if I have abandoned the principles of harmonic balance that have guided me for 8 centuries? The answer is yes. She stood straighter, ignoring the pain in her leg and ignoring the exhaustion that still clung to her cellular structure. But you have not asked the question that matters. You have not asked if I am willing to accept restoration. And the answer to that question is no. High Architect Meridian's projections solidified his form, becoming almost corporeal in its intensity. You do not have a choice, Architect Valen. The restoration is not a request. It is a medical necessity. Without it, you will deteriorate. Your neural link will collapse, and the 3 billion signatures you carry will be lost to the Thorn sector. Then let them be lost, Lysara said, and felt the weight of those words settle into her bones. Because I will not sacrifice my consciousness to maintain a lie. I will not erase the memory of what I have learned, what I have felt, what I have chosen. You choose discord over harmony. High Architect Thorn said, his voice heavy with something that might have been grief. You choose chaos over peace. No, Lysara looked down at Brennan again, drawing strength from his steady presence. I choose truth over comfort. I choose awareness over ignorance. I choose the noise. The council began to speak, to argue, to present logical progressions that proved her decision was irrational, inefficient, destructive to everything the hegemony had built. And then the flagship shuddered. It was not the gentle vibration of course corrections or the subtle hum of phase transition. It was a deep structural groan that spoke of violence applied to systems designed to withstand violence. Every Celestian in the chamber looked up simultaneously, their neural links querying the ship's status. The answer came back in a cascade of alarm codes and damage reports that painted a clear picture. The Oculus was under attack. Eric's appeared at the chamber's entrance, his armor scorched along one side. High Council, we have multiple hostile signatures emerging from Quantum Slip, Terran Mandate Dreadnought flagship, and Iron Shard assault carriers. They are coordinating their fire patterns. Impossible, High Architect Meridian said. The Mandate and the Shard are enemies. They would never coordinate. They are coordinating now, Eric's replied, and they are targeting this vessel specifically. They know Architect Valen is aboard. Lysara felt ice form in her chest. She knew what this was. She had seen the pattern in her analysis of human tactical doctrine. The Mandate wanted a martyr. The Shard wanted a trophy. And neither of them cared that their combined assault would kill everyone aboard the Oculus to get what they wanted. She turned to the council. This is what your silence has purchased. A galaxy so desperate for meaning that they are willing to create it through our corpses. They do not want peace. They want a cause, an enemy clear enough to justify their existence. Another impact rocked the chamber. The data ribbons flickered and died, the quantum processors struggling to maintain cohesion under the electromagnetic assault. High Architect Thorn's projection wavered. We will activate defensive protocols. The Oculus has withstood worse than this. No, Eric said quietly. We will not. Our harmonic weapons require consensus to activate. And right now our crew is experiencing neural desynchronization. They are asking questions. Why are we being attacked, and what purpose does our neutrality serve? Is the harmony worth dying for? He looked at Lysara, and she saw accusation in his eyes. Your testimony was broadcast through the entire ship's network. Every crew member heard you confess to genocide, heard you question the fundamental principles of our existence. You have infected them with doubt, and doubt is the antithesis of the consensus we require. The flagship shuddered again, harder this time. Systems were failing. The perfect white walls were developing cracks, showing the darker composite beneath. Then this is my fault, Lysara said, and I will repair it. She stepped off the interface platform, dropping the 3 meters to the floor and landing with a grace her injured body should not have possessed. Brennan was at her side immediately, his hand on her arm. What are you doing? He asked. Finishing what I started. She looked up at the council, at Eric's, at all the perfect faces judging her from their harmonic heights. You say I have infected your crew with discord. Then let me give them something to harmonize around. Not silence, not the absence of questions, but a choice. She turned and ran from the chamber, Brennan keeping pace beside her. The wardens moved to intercept, but Eric's raised his hand. Let her go, he said. Let us see what choice she makes when faced with the consequences of her contamination. Lysara ran through corridors that twisted and reformed around her fleeing form, following neural pathways etched into the ship's architecture over centuries of service. She knew where she needed to go. The primary harmonic relay, the junction point where all neural traffic converged before being distributed to the Thorn sector. If she could reach it, if she could broadcast one more time, she could give her people the truth. All of it. Not filtered through protocols and probability matrices, but raw and immediate and real. She could show them Celia drawing cardinals. They reached the relay chamber to find it already occupied. 3 Celestian technicians, their hands moving over holographic interfaces with movements that had become uncertain, hesitant. They looked up as Lysara entered, and she saw something in their eyes she had never seen in her people before. They looked afraid. High Architect, one of them said, his voice trembling on the edge of the harmonic frequencies. The ship is failing. We cannot achieve consensus for defensive measures. The crew is, they are thinking, Lysara finished. They are questioning. They are becoming individuals instead of nodes in a network. It is destroying us, the technician whispered. No. Lysara moved to the central interface, her hands finding the familiar controls, even as another impact sent her stumbling. The silence is what destroyed us. We have been dead for 4,000 years. We just did not realize it because we never allowed ourselves to feel the absence. She activated the relay, feeling it connect to her neural architecture like a key sliding into a lock. The 3 billion voices of the Thorn sector roared into her consciousness, and beneath them she felt the 2,317 crew members of the Oculus, their thoughts no longer synchronized, their harmony fractured into individual melodies. I am High Architect Lysara Valen. She broadcast her consciousness, all touching every mind aboard the ship simultaneously. And I am going to show you what we have lost. She opened her memories like floodgates, releasing everything she had witnessed, everything she had learned, everything Brennan had taught her in a bunker beneath the Nevada desert. The Valerian genocide, the Meridian massacre, Celia's disc, the warmth of human hands covered in blood, working to save a life simply because it existed. She showed them her confession, her guilt, her transformation from judge to judged. And beneath all of it, she posed a single question that echoed through 2,317 minds. If we silence every voice that makes us uncomfortable, what songs do we have left to sing? The response was immediate and overwhelming. Not consensus, not harmony, but a cascade of individual reactions, each one unique, each one real. Fear and anger and grief and hope and confusion and wonder, all of it flooding through the neural network in a chaotic symphony that had no structure, no organization, no carefully maintained balance. It was noise. Beautiful, terrible, honest noise. And in the midst of it, Lysara felt something break. Not in her consciousness, but in the collective architecture that bound the hegemony together. The harmonic fields that maintained perfect synchronization across billions of minds flickered and failed, unable to process the sudden influx of individuality. 3 billion voices stopped singing in unison. 3 billion voices started singing alone. The flagship groaned as its crew, for the first time in their lives, had to coordinate through spoken language rather than shared thought. It was clumsy, inefficient, slow. It was choice. Lysara felt Brennan's hand on her shoulder, grounding her as the flood of sensation threatened to overwhelm her consciousness. Lysara, he said, his voice barely audible over the alarms that were now screaming through the ship. The vessel's failing. You've given them individuality, but we're all going to die if we don't find a way to make it out of this. She nodded, pulling herself back from the abyss of 3 billion newly awakened minds. You are correct. I have given them consciousness. Now I must give them purpose. She broadcast again, but this time her message was simple, practical, immediate. Crew of the Oculus, we are under attack. Our harmonic weapons will not function without consensus, and consensus is no longer possible. But we do not need weapons. We need only to survive long enough to reach the Nevada Nebula. Individual action coordinated through spoken communication. Begin emergency evacuation protocols. Abandon ship. The response was chaos. But it was purposeful chaos, directed chaos that moved toward a goal rather than simply spiraling into entropy. Lysara turned to Brennan. We need to reach the lifeboat bays, but first we need to retrieve the others. What others? The mandate cleaners I rendered unconscious. They are still in the bunker teleportation signature. They are aboard this ship, and if we are abandoning vessel, we take everyone. Brennan stared at her. You want to save the men who came to kill you. I want to choose, Lysara said, who lives and who dies, and I choose that everyone lives if I have the power to make it so. Another impact. The walls of the relay chamber split, showing the black void beyond. They ran. The corridor between the relay chamber and the teleportation recovery bay stretched through 3 impossible angles and a section of the ship that was currently open to vacuum. Lysara and Brennan moved through it at a dead run, their path lit by emergency bioluminescence from walls that were actively dying, the organic components of the Oculus beginning to lose cohesion as the harmonic fields that sustained them collapsed. Behind them, the ship was tearing itself apart. Not from the external bombardment alone, though, that continued in rhythmic pulses that sent shockwaves through the superstructure. The real damage was the internal structural, the result of 2,317 minds that had spent their entire existence synchronized, suddenly discovering the concept of disagreement. Some crew members were fleeing toward the lifeboat bays as Lysara had commanded. Others were frozen in corridors, paralyzed by the sudden weight of individual decision-making. Still others were attempting to restore the harmonic fields through sheer force of will, their neural links burning out as they tried to impose order on a chaos that could no longer be contained. Lysara felt each death as it occurred, a sudden absence in the vast tapestry of consciousness she still carried. 3 billion voices, and now 2,309, 2,301, 2,294, 2,291. They were dying because she had given them choice, and they did not yet know how to live with it. The thought should have crushed her. Instead, it drove her forward faster. The recovery bay was a small chamber near the ship's core, where biological matter from incomplete teleportations was temporarily stored for reconstitution or disposal. Lysara had gambled that the mandate cleaners rendered unconscious by her harmonic pulse would have been classified as contaminated material and held here rather than processed through standard crew quarters. She was correct. 3 men in black tactical armor lay on stasis platforms, their bodies locked in positions of distress, their faces visible through cracked visors. She recognized them from the bunker assault, could still feel the echo of their consciousness from when she had flooded them with 3 billion memories. Brennan moved immediately to the nearest platform, checking vital signs with the portable scanner he had somehow retained through the teleportation. They're alive, unconscious but stable. Neural activity is all over the place, though. Whatever you did to them, they're still processing it. They are experiencing what I carry, Lysara said, moving to deactivate the stasis fields. Every memory of every species we have pruned, every moment of every life we deemed acceptable loss. It is a weight that should be shared. The stasis fields dropped. The 3 cleaners remained unconscious, but their bodies began to move, twitching and trembling as their minds continued to process the impossible burden of sensation. We cannot carry them all, Lysara said, looking at Brennan. Not without. The door behind them exploded inward. Not from bombardment, but from a precisely applied gravity pulse. High Warden Eric stood in the breach, his silver armor scorched black along the right side, his helmet cracked to reveal one eye burning with something that might have been fury or grief or both. Enough, he said, and his voice was no longer a harmonic broadcast, but actual speech words shaped by a throat that had not used them in 600 years. The sound was raw, uncontrolled. I have watched you destroy 4,000 years of peace in a single day, Lysara. I have watched our crew descend into chaos. I have watched wardens weeping like human children because you showed them emotions they were never designed to feel. He raised his hand and between his fingers materialized a spear of black light. Not harmonic energy, but something older, a deletion weapon from the early wars before the hegemony had achieved its perfect silence. It was designed for one purpose: to erase a neural signature from existence, to unmake consciousness itself. I will not let you spread this disease further, Eriks continued. The High Council has granted me authority to terminate your contamination with extreme prejudice. You will be deleted. The human will be deleted, and we will restore the harmony before it is too late. Lysara stepped forward, placing herself between the deletion spear and Brennan. Then delete me, old friend. But know that when you do, you will erase the only memory of the Valyrians that still exists. You will silence the last voice of every species we have pruned. You will complete the genocide I began 400 years ago. Eric's hand trembled. The spear flickered. They were already dead, he whispered. You cannot kill what has already ceased. Memory is not death, Lysara said. As long as one voice remembers, as long as one consciousness carries the echo of what was lost, the dead still speak. You taught me that, Eriks, in the academies when we studied the preservation protocols. You said that an architect's duty was to ensure that nothing was truly forgotten. I was wrong, Eric said. Some things should be forgotten. Some noise should be silenced. Behind Lysara, she heard the metallic click of a weapon being drawn. Brennan's voice steady despite the exhaustion she could hear threading through it. Put down the spear, Warden. Last warning. Eric's gaze shifted to Brennan and something like amusement flickered across his features. You would threaten me with a primitive kinetic weapon. Your bullets cannot penetrate phase matter armor. Maybe not, Brennan said, but they can sure as hell ruin your aim. The shot came not from directly behind Lysara, but from an angle Brennan having moved while Eric's attention was on her. The slug hit the warden's shoulder joint, the impact not penetrating, but transferring enough kinetic force to throw off his stance. The deletion sphere, already manifesting toward Lysara's chest, veered left and struck the wall instead. The wall screamed. The organic composite material didn't just break or burn, it ceased, a perfect circle of matter, simply ceasing to exist at a molecular level, leaving a void through which the stars beyond the ship became visible. Eric staggered, his armor's kinetic dampeners struggling to compensate for an attack vector they hadn't been calibrated to expect. He raised the spear again, but before he could aim, the ship lurched violently to port. Through the hole in the wall, Lysara could see why. The Terran Mandate dreadnought had moved into close engagement range, its railguns firing in continuous streams that hammered the Oculus's failing shields. Behind it, iron shard interceptors wove through the debris field, their plasma lances adding their own contribution to the destruction. We are all going to die here, Eric said, lowering the spear. You have given us chaos, Lysara, and chaos cannot stand against coordinated assault. Then give them something better than chaos, Brennan said, still holding his pistol ready. Give them a reason to coordinate that isn't blind obedience. Eric looked at him. Really looked at him for the first time, his silver eyes tracking across Brennan's face, as if seeing something he had not expected to find. What reason could possibly unite consciousness that has been fractured into individual components? Survival, Brennan said simply. The oldest reason there is. Another impact close enough that the deck plating beneath them buckled. One of the unconscious cleaners rolled off his platform and Lysara caught him before he hit the floor, her injured leg protesting but holding. Eric's watched her cradle the human soldier, watched her adjust her grip to avoid aggravating his injuries, watched her carefully turn him onto his side to prevent aspiration if he vomited. The deletion spear in his hand flickered and died. You are saving the enemy, Eric said, the very individuals who came to execute you. I am saving patience, Lysara replied. as I was taught by a disgraced human medic in a bunker beneath the Nevada desert. They are not enemies. They are people who made choices based on incomplete information, just as I did when I signed the Valerian execution order, just as you are doing now. Eric stood motionless for a long moment. Then slowly he raised his hands to his helmet and disengaged the seals. The obsidian faceplate split and retracted, revealing his full face for the first time in centuries. His expression was not peaceful. It was fractured, torn between 600 years of conditioning and the brutal simplicity of the choice Lysara had placed before him. I remember, he said, his voice breaking on the words. I remember being afraid. Before the academies, before the optimization, before I learned to subsume my consciousness into the harmonic whole. I was 11 years old, over 700 years ago now, and my genetic architect parents were explaining that I would be elevated to training, that I would become something greater than individual existence. And I was afraid. He looked at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. When did we forget that fear was proof of life rather than evidence of malfunction? The ship groaned around them, a deep structural sound that spoke of imminent catastrophic failure. Through the neural link that still bound them all, Lysara felt the crew's panic rising, individual voices calling out in confusion and terror. She made her decision. Eric's, she said, her voice carrying the full weight of 800 years of authority. I am going to the primary relay one more time. I am going to use the last of the ship's power to broadcast a final harmonic pulse. It will not be consensus. It will not be control. It will be a heartbeat, a rhythm they can follow without sacrificing their individuality. Will you help me? Eric's looked at the unconscious soldiers at Brennan, with his primitive weapon at Lysara standing in the ruins of everything they had built together. Then he nodded. I will help you, but only if we evacuate everyone. The conscious, the unconscious, the willing and the unwilling. If we are choosing life over harmony, then we choose it for all. Agreed, Lysara said. They moved as a unit, Eric's using his armor's enhanced strength to carry two of the cleaners while Brennan and Lysara supported the third between them. The journey to the lifeboat bay was a nightmare of collapsing corridors and failing gravity fields, but they were not alone. Other crew members, having finally grasped the concept of coordinated individual action, were helping each other toward the evacuation points. Lysara saw a young technician, barely a century old, carrying an injured warden twice her size. She saw navigation specialists manually rerouting power to maintain life support in occupied sections. She saw for the first time in Celestian society people helping each other, not because the harmony demanded it, but because they chose to. The lifeboat bay was chaos. 23 small vessels designed for emergency evacuation, each one capable of holding perhaps 30 individuals in extreme discomfort. 2,000 souls and space for barely 700. Lysara watched fights breaking out, watched people shoving and clawing for position, watched the ugly reality of survival. Instinct overwhelming newly awakened consciousness. Then she saw something else. One of the wardens, his gold armor marking him as command rank, stepped away from a lifeboat entrance. He placed his hand on the shoulder of a terrified technician and gently guided her into his place. I have lived 800 years, he said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. You have lived 93. The mathematics are simple. Another warden followed his example. Then another. The gold-armored command staff, the eldest and most experienced, systematically giving their places to the youngest crew members. Lysara felt something crack in her chest, a sensation so intense it took her a moment to recognize it as pride. They are learning, Eric said quietly beside her. Learning that sacrifice can be choice rather than duty. But there were still too many, and the ship was dying faster than the evacuation could proceed. Lysara moved to the bay's control panel, accessing the ship's failing systems through her neural link one last time. The primary reactor was at 7% functionality, barely enough to maintain the lifeboat launch mechanisms. She could divert that power to the harmonic relay, could send one final pulse to help coordinate the evacuation. But doing so would mean the reactor would fail completely, and the last boats would be trapped in the bay when the ship broke apart. Or she could do something far more dangerous. She opened a neural channel to every conscious mind in the bay. I can stabilize the ship for 3 minutes, long enough for all boats to launch. But it will require me to maintain a harmonic field manually without the ship's support systems. The strain will likely cause permanent neural damage. Brennan's hand was on her arm immediately. No. Lysara, no. We'll find another way. There is no other way, she said, meeting his eyes. And this is my choice. You taught me that every life has value. I choose to prove I learned the lesson. Before he could argue further, she activated the relay. The sensation was unlike anything she had experienced. The ship's harmonic field collapsing and fragmentary suddenly had a living focal point, a consciousness actively shaping it, directing it, holding it together through sheer force of will. Lysara felt her neural architecture burning under the load, felt pathways designed for communication, being repurposed for structural maintenance, felt her carefully cultivated memory, matrices beginning to corrupt as she diverted processing power to keep the oculus intact. 3 minutes. She needed to hold for 3 minutes. Through the haze of pain, she watched the lifeboats launching. One after another, silver teardrops dropping away from the dying flagship and angling toward the Nevada Nebula, where sensors would not easily track them. She counted them, marking each successful launch against the timeline burning in her consciousness. 15 boats away, 1 minute elapsed. Her blue script tattoos were turning black, the bioluminescence failing as the cells died. 18 boats away, 1 minute 40 seconds. She could no longer feel her legs, her motor control surrendering to the demands of maintaining the harmonic field. 20 boats away, 2 minutes 10 seconds. She was losing her vision, the optical processing centers of her brain being cannibalized for computational power. 22 boats away, 2 minutes 45 seconds. She could no longer remember her own name, could only hold on to the singular purpose: 3 minutes, keep them alive for 3 minutes. 23 boats away, 2 minutes 58 seconds. She let go. The harmonic field collapsed. Lysara collapsed with it, her body hitting the deck. With no grace whatsoever, her consciousness fragmenting into 1,000 disconnected pieces. She was dimly aware of hands on her, of being lifted, of movement. Then nothing. She woke to the sound of crying. Not human crying, though there was some of that too. This was Celestian, weeping, the wet, ragged hitching of a species that had spent 4,000 years without tears, suddenly rediscovering the mechanism. Lysara opened her eyes to find herself in a lifeboat, the cramped interior packed with bodies in a configuration that spoke of absolute desperation. She was lying across 3 seats, her head in Brennan's lap, his hands moving through her hair with the gentle precision of someone checking for cranial trauma. "Welcome back," he said softly. "You scared the hell out of me." She tried to speak and discovered her voice was gone, burned out, along with most of her higher cognitive functions. She managed a questioning sound. "We made it," Brennan said. "All 23 boats launched. You held the ship together just long enough. Then Eric's threw you over his shoulder and ran like the devil himself was chasing us." He paused. "Technically, the explosion was chasing us, but the principle holds." Lysara turned her head slowly, the movement sending spikes of pain through her neural architecture. Around her in the lifeboat were faces she recognized. Celestian crew members. The 3 mandate cleaners, now conscious and looking deeply traumatized. 2 iron shard prisoners who had been in the brig when the attack started. And Eric sitting against the far wall, his silver armor scorched black, his face streaked with the silver tears. "How many did we lose?" Lysara managed to whisper. Eric's face was grave. 73 total. 26 died during the crew's initial awakening neural burnout as they tried to process individuality for the first time. Their minds unable to bear the weight of sudden consciousness. He paused, silver tears tracking down his face. But 47 chose to stay behind to ensure the boats could launch. They died making a decision that the Harmony would have deemed inefficient and that I now understand was the most profound act of consciousness our species has achieved in 4 millennia. Through the lifeboat's small viewport, Lysara could see the oculus breaking apart the flagship's beautiful mercury hull, fracturing into 1,000 pieces that caught the light of the Nevada Nebula and reflected it in colors that shouldn't exist. It looked like a flower blooming in reverse petals of exotic matter unfurling into the void. "It was beautiful," she whispered. "It was a ship," one of the mandate cleaners said, his voice rough. "Just a ship." "No," Lysara said, forcing herself to sit up despite Brennan's protests. "It was a symbol. 4,000 years of perfect silence of harmony, maintained through the elimination of every discordant voice. And we destroyed it not with weapons, but with questions." She looked at the cleaner, recognizing him as the sergeant who had led the bunker assault. What is your name? He blinked, surprised by the question. Sergeant Marcus Webb Terran Mandate Medical Corps serial number. Not your rank, your name. Marcus. Marcus, Lissar repeated. When I flooded your mind with the 3 billion memories, what did you see? His face crumpled. I saw faces. Hundreds of them. Civilians at Meridian. A family hiding in a maintenance corridor. I threw a flashbang without checking occupancy first. A teenage boy running toward an evac point. I authorized fire because his heat signature matched combatant parameters. An old woman clutching a photo album. She died in the shockwave from our breach charge. He couldn't continue, his hands shaking. Every decision I made by the book. Everyone left someone dead who shouldn't be. They had names, Lissar said gently. The family was the Torrances, Michael, Sarah, and their daughter Emma. The boy was named Devin Cho. The woman was Mariam Reston. She was carrying the last photos of her grandchildren. I carry them all now, Marcus. As do you. Marcus stared at her, his eyes red. How do you live with it, knowing what we've done? By choosing differently from this moment forward, Lysura said, by ensuring that the weight we carry changes how we act, not just how we feel. She looked around at the cramped interior, at the mix of species and allegiances and former enemies packed together in a space designed for half their number. We are alive because we chose cooperation over protocol. We are here because 47 individuals decided that the collective good was worth individual sacrifice. But they made that decision themselves without harmony, forcing the choice. She felt strength returning to her voice. This is what consciousness looks like. Messy, painful, inefficient, and more beautiful than any harmonic field could ever be. The lifeboat's navigation system chimed, indicating they had reached the Nevada Nebula's outer boundary and were beginning deceleration toward the designated refuge point. Through the viewports, Lysara could see the other boats, 22 silver teardrops forming a loose convoy towards a moon that registered on sensors as Valona Station, a neutral trading post in unclaimed space. What happens now? One of the young Celestian technicians asked. The hegemony will consider us rogue. The mandate will consider us traitors. The shard will consider us targets. We have no home. Then we build one, Lysara said, one choice at a time. The landing on Valona Station was controlled chaos. The station authorities, accustomed to smugglers and refugees, took one look at 23 lifeboats full of Celestians and humans and decided that discretion was the better part of survival. They provided docking clearance and pointed toward the lower levels where spaces could be rented without excessive questions. Over the following 6 months, those lower levels transformed. What had been empty shipping containers and abandoned storage facilities became something new. A clinic, a shelter, a community built by people who had nothing in common except that they had all chosen to survive together. Lysara stood in the clinic's main room, her hands still bearing faint scars where the bioluminescent tattoos had burned out and refused to regenerate, wrapping a bandage around the knee of a small girl who had fallen while playing in the station's gravity-variable recreation zones. There, she said, her voice still missing some of its harmonic resonance, but carrying a warmth that centuries of perfect pitch had never achieved. Good as new, but try to be more careful in the low-gravity sections. Your bones are still developing. The girl, perhaps 5 years old with red hair and freckles, looked up at her with wide eyes. Are you an angel? My mom says you came from the stars. Lysara smiled, the expression still feeling new on her face. No, sweetheart, just someone who learned to listen. 800 years too late, but better late than silent. The girl's mother, a refugee from one of the Shard border colonies, collected her daughter with a grateful nod. As they left, Brennan entered carrying a crate of medical supplies. 3 more refugees from the Meridian sector just docked, he said, setting down the crate. Burns and malnutrition. I've got them in exam room 2. I will handle it, Lysara said, standing. You have been working for 14 hours. Rest. Says the woman who held a starship together with her brain for 3 minutes. Brennan replied, but there was affection in his voice. We're quite a pair, aren't we? 2 stubborn idiots who don't know when to quit. We complement each other's inadequacies, Lysara agreed. The clinic had become the heart of their small community. Eric's handled security and coordination, having discovered a talent for organization that didn't require harmonic consensus. The younger Celestians learned human medical techniques from Brennan while teaching the refugee humans about advanced cellular repair. The three former mandate cleaners, Marcus included, had become the clinic's outreach team, moving through the station's lower levels to find people who needed help but were afraid to ask for it. It was imperfect. It was difficult. It was nothing like the vast harmonic networks Lasara had once maintained. It was real. A chime at the clinic entrance drew Lasara's attention. She looked up to see a figure in faded Terran Mandate uniform standing in the doorway, his shoulders hunched as if carrying an impossible weight. His rank insignia marked him as a major, and his face was familiar from intelligence briefings and tactical assessments. Major Cade Hartwell, the man who had sent the cleaners to kill her in the bunker. The man whose coordinated assault with the Iron Shard had destroyed the Oculus. The man who had sealed a habitat dome with his own daughter inside. Brennan's hand moved toward his sidearm, but Lysara placed her hand over his. "Wait," she said quietly. Hartwell took a step forward and Lysara saw that he was holding something. A small metal disc that caught the clinic's overhead lighting. Celia's identification tag. "Dr. Cross, Architect Valen," Hartwell said, his voice rough. I came to..." He stopped, swallowed, tried again. "I came to learn." "Learn what?" Lysara asked. "How to hear the noise." He looked at the tag in his hand, his face crumpling. "This was my daughter's. She died at Meridian because I ordered the habitat sealed before civilian evacuation was complete. I told myself it was necessary. That tactical objectives required sacrifice. That individual lives were less important than strategic advantage." He raised his eyes and Lysara saw they